So, we're in the middle of a series in Isaiah, and we're coming to a passage in Isaiah that's kind of a transition between the first big half of Isaiah and the second big half of Isaiah, and it's a different kind of, it's very different than the rest of Isaiah because it's a story that is also found in 2 Kings, mainly in almost the exact same form. But quickly, I'm just wondering if, I know some of you have been reading through Isaiah with us, and I'm just wondering, if you've been doing that, what has been your experience? Have you been enjoying reading Isaiah? Has it been hard? Have you had any insights? Anyone want to just share something that you have gained from your personal reading of Isaiah?
Well, the first part is quite hard to understand.
Okay.
The second one's better.
Okay. The second one has a very different feel from the first part, and a lot of people are much more comfortable with the second part, so you're not the only one.
The way you explain the geography and the historical situation helped me to not just see the bunch of random cities, but how it all fits together.
Just how often Jesus quoted. If you read these verses in Isaiah, you realize he's quoting him all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons we're doing Isaiah is because it's one of the most often referenced books, Old Testament books, that's referenced in the New Testament. I mean, Genesis, Psalms, and Isaiah, and Deuteronomy, somewhat, are kind of the ones that are most often referenced in the New Testament. And I'm finding more and more things in Isaiah that have the connection that I missed. Because Isaiah is long on the reading list, we're just kind of reading through it one time. When we did Sermon on the Mount, we tried to read it over and over every week. I mean, really what you need to do is read Isaiah a second time, is you get the bigger picture. I'm hoping that my sermons have helped somewhat to see what's going on in the background. So if you read it again, other things will slowly make more and more sense. But anyway, Iris' experience of struggling some with the first part, and then the second part, makes a little more sense. I think you'll feel that way. Yeah.
I will also join with what you said, but from another perspective. I think how much is about Jesus in this time.
Yeah.
This time, I'm just, I always knew it, but I'm shocked.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, and in a way, this is, the point of this sermon, the end point of this sermon is it's all about Jesus and how much we need Jesus, and what the good news is, especially in the second part of the book, that, wow, here's all these symbols of Jesus there. So 36 to 39 in Isaiah is all a story. It's not mainly, Isaiah isn't the main character in that section, though he appears and says some things, but it's not mainly Isaiah's prophecies. It's a story, an incident that happened in the life of Hezekiah, who was one of the kings at the end of Isaiah's ministry. And so Isaiah 36 begins this way. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. 40 or so cities the Assyrians had captured all around Jerusalem. Then the king of Assyria sent his field commander with a large army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. When the commander stopped at the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the washman's field, Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator, Shebna the scribe, and Joah, the son of Asaph, the recorder, went out to meet him. So here's kind of a picture of what's going on. Okay, if you remember the bigger map, the Assyrians have come, from the north. They've come down. They've taken all those northern countries, including, big ones and so forth. They've already wiped out the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay? And as this story starts, they've come down the coastline. They've wiped out, or they've taken over these cities of Philistia and all around Jerusalem. And so the main Assyrian army is here at the city of Lachish, the city that they have, now taken over. Long siege, and they took it over. So they pretty much have Jerusalem surrounded, and they're in a very strategic position because Judah has often had this slim hope that maybe the Egyptians are going to come and rescue them. It's not going to happen because now this huge Assyrian army is between Jerusalem and the Egyptians, and there's no hope in Egypt. There's nothing left but Jerusalem. Even this powerful city, Lachish, has been taken over. And this was significant for the Assyrians because someone made this kind of, I guess out of clay, I don't know if they hammered it in stone or out of clay, this image of the siege of Lachish, where the Assyrian king is like, look at what we've done. And they taken this back to Nineveh as look at this great accomplishment. Look how great we are, how powerful we are. Look what a great king I am. We've taken over all these other kings and kingdoms, and they all pretty much have to come and give tribute to us. This is our greatness. So that's kind of the background to what's happening in Isaiah 36 to 39. If you're interested in history, the date that's usually assigned to this is the year 701 BC or BCE. Okay, so yeah, I imagine most of you, I don't know if any of you are history buffs, so probably you're like, you don't care at all. But if you're interested, the year 701, before the time of Jesus, is when this is happening. So, Jerusalem is surrounded. The main army is, about 50 kilometers or so south of Jerusalem. But Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, sent another army to surround Jerusalem. That army has a commander, and this commander has come to meet, with the leaders of Hezekiah's guys. And so the next part of Isaiah 36 is what's called in this translation the field commander of the Assyrian army, and it's basically his propaganda campaign, hoping that Jerusalem will just surrender. They don't really want to have a long siege, because that's going to take many months. It's still a pretty powerful city. They've got a big enough army probably to defend the walls, so they'd rather Jerusalem just surrender. And so he's kind of speaking, and he says, number one, you can't trust Egypt. Isaiah has actually already been saying, don't trust Egypt. You can't trust Egypt. And so the Assyrians are saying, don't trust Egypt. And he paints this image of Egypt is like this staff or rod you're going to try to lean on, but it's weak, and it's going to snap. And when that stick snaps, the sharp end is going to jab into your hand. You can't trust Egypt. There's no hope in Egypt. Who you were trusting in is going to give you no hope. But then he also says God isn't going to help you either. Because this is what Hezekiah has done. Before Hezekiah's time, besides the temple in Jerusalem, people were kind of worshiping in all sorts of places. Maybe worshiping the true God, maybe worshiping other gods, but in any high place, there's a grove of oak trees or whatever, people would set up an altar, and there were all these alternate places of worship that these Judeans were worshiping at wrongly, and Isaiah has wiped out all those places. As he ought to have. This was a good thing that Hezekiah did. Hezekiah did this, and he said, only in temple, you've got to worship God only, in the temple in Jerusalem. But the king of Assyria has heard that. Of course, he's a pagan. So what he's thinking is, look, Hezekiah has wiped out most of your gods. He's not even letting you worship. Your God is going to abandon you because look what Hezekiah has done. Now that little piece of propaganda is not going to influence Hezekiah because Hezekiah has done this out of faithfulness. But see, a lot of the people are not as faithful to Yahweh as Hezekiah is. And some of them, don't necessarily like Hezekiah, and they're thinking, I don't know, maybe God isn't going to be with us. What our king has done, maybe it wasn't good. Maybe that's not what God wanted, and maybe God is angry at Hezekiah. And so the people listening to what this guy is saying are maybe thinking, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be on Hezekiah's side. Maybe our God has abandoned us. And then the third thing the field commander says is, you guys don't even have any military might. You don't have any horses. If I gave you 2,000 horses, you wouldn't have enough guys who would even be able to ride those horses. You cannot trust in your own military might. It's gone. You know, you might have some men to defend your walls, but you've got nothing more. Okay, you cannot defeat our army. You might last a little while behind your walls in Jerusalem, but you do not have enough military might. You cannot defend yourself. But then the fourth part of the propaganda campaign is that he says, you know, by the way, actually, God has called us to come take over your city. I mean, that's what Isaiah has said. I mean, if you remember, Isaiah has said that, you know, he is allowing Assyria to do this. There's almost certainly spies in Jerusalem. People have probably, the Assyrians have been paying. And so they've heard what Isaiah has said, and they're taking Isaiah's words and using them against Hezekiah, you know, as a way of saying, this is another reason you can't trust your God, because actually your God is on our side. You might as well just surrender. Well, Hezekiah's three guys who go out to meet him, you know, they start off by saying, you know, don't speak in Hebrew to our people. Just speak in Aramaic. At that time, Aramaic is kind of the language of diplomacy. You know, I don't know what English is now and what French was at once upon a time and what Latin was before that. Aramaic was kind of the common language, you know, and most of the people in Jerusalem didn't know Aramaic. And so Hezekiah's guys are trying to say, just speak Aramaic. They don't want all the citizens to hear that. Unfortunately, you know, the Assyrian has some Hebrew-speaking people, and so he ignores these diplomats and he just yells out onto the walls to all the people listening in Hebrew, you know, what's going to happen. He even says, it's not going to be so bad for you. Look, if you just surrender your city, you'll be able to go back to your homes. You'll have a nice period of time at your homes. You'll be able to eat well, you know. And then, when we all go back to Assyria, you can come back with us. It's all going to be okay, because Assyria is a great land, and you're going to have everything that you need. Just surrender, and you're not going to have to go through the pain of the siege and be wiped out anyway. So that's, you know, this is kind of this propaganda campaign that is going on. Unfortunately for the Assyrians, he goes at least one step too far. And this is what he then says. Don't let Hezekiah mislead you when he says the Lord will deliver us. Have any of the gods of any nations ever delivered their lands from the hand of the king of Assyria? Well, no, they haven't. None of those other gods delivered them. Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? They're nowhere. Where are the gods of the Sepharvaim? I don't know. Donnie might be able to pronounce that better. Have they rescued Samaria from my hand? Who of all the gods of these countries have been able to save their lands from me? And the answer is no one. None of their gods delivered them. Assyria had no respect for those gods, has no respect for any gods. They haven't yet come face to face with the God of Israel. They're about to. How then can the Lord deliver Jerusalem from my hand? And of course, the answer is going to be quite easily. Quite easily he can. But he defies the one true God of the universe. And now his end is going to be assured. So Hezekiah's guys, they hear all of this, and they go back to Hezekiah. And then Hezekiah sends some of them and some of the priests to Isaiah, to say, we're in trouble. By the way, Isaiah might be in kind of semi-retirement. He's no doubt fairly old. If you remember the beginning of Isaiah, his ministry was over the course of 4 kings. Hezekiah was the last one. So, Isaiah might think, I'm pretty much done. And a lot of his ministry might be over. But still, they know he's the prophet. So they send word to Isaiah. And Isaiah's replies in chapter 37. When King Hezekiah's officials came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, Tell your master, this is what the Lord says. Do not be afraid. Of course, we over the years, we constantly see that phrase, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. When God is involved, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid about what you've heard. Those words with which the underlings of the king of Assyria to blaspheme me. Isaiah is being kind of, sarcastic. Those little boys who belong to the king of Assyria, don't be afraid of that. They're nothing. They're just little boys running their mouths. Don't be afraid. Listen, I'm going to put a spirit in him so that when he hears a certain report, he will return to his own country, and there I will have him cut down with the sword. So that seemed to be what happened. There was a rumor that maybe the Egyptians are coming. It might or might not have been true. I don't know if actually God, maybe God started a rumor, and it wasn't even true. I don't know. Or maybe, there was some Egyptian force that was coming, but it caused, the king of Assyria to kind of just back off of Jerusalem a little bit and to make sure he had a force ready to face the Egyptians. Okay, but then, because he's backing off to Jerusalem, he sends this letter just to say, you guys aren't going to escape. Don't think you're okay. I'm coming back. This is just a little glitch in our plan. We'll take care of those Egyptians and we're going to be back. You do better to surrender. So he sends this letter to Hezekiah. And Hezekiah makes the right move. He takes the letter and he goes to the temple and he essentially says, this is what the king of Assyria has said. He says this to God, and he shows this letter to God and says, this is what they said. This is what they think about your people and your city and who you are. And that's how Hezekiah cries out to God. And in his prayer, this is what he prays. So Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers and read it. Then he went up to the temple of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord. Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You made heaven and earth. None of those other gods did. Whether they existed as spiritual forces or whatever, they were not the creator of the universe. Give ear, Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, Lord, and see. Listen to all the words Sennacherib has sent to ridicule the living God. It's true, Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste all these peoples in their lands. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them. For they were not gods, but only wood and stone fashioned by human hands. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, Lord, are the only God. This is going to come up again and again in the last part of Isaiah. There is one God. There's only one God. He alone. He alone is the Savior. He alone is God. And so Hezekiah prays this prayer, and in response to that, Isaiah kind of gives a long speech about their deliverance. In chapter 37:21, Isaiah the son of Amoz sent a message to Hezekiah. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Because you have prayed to me concerning Sennacherib, king of Assyria, this is the word the Lord has spoken against him. The virgin daughter of Zion despises and mocks you. The daughter of Jerusalem tosses her head as you flee. Should stop there, because if you've been paying attention to Isaiah, there's nothing virgin about the people. They have been in sin and idolatry. They are an unclean people. The people of Jerusalem and Judea. And yet God calls them the virgin daughter. This is how God chooses to see the people that he has chosen, his people. He chooses to see them as they ought to be. And he calls these very, very simple people virgin daughter. It's just amazing. It blows me away that here in the middle of this book, which is all about their sin, God says the virgin daughter of Zion. In the middle of Isaiah's response, we see again a theme that's going to come up repeatedly. We've already seen it, and it's going to come up again in the second part of Isaiah. Have you not heard? This is God speaking. Long ago I ordained it. Nothing is happening by accident. Nothing is out of God's hands. In days of old I planned it, now I brought it to pass, that you have turned fortified cities into piles of stone. You think, Sennacherib, you think you did this. You think you chose to do this and you have the power to pull this off. It only happened because this world is in my hands. You defeated fortified cities because I allowed it to happen. It was not your power and might. It's my world, God says. Their people, drained of power, are dismayed and put to shame. They're like plants in the field, like tender green shoots, like grass sprouting on the roof, scorched before it grows. If they gave up, if they surrendered, it's because God caused that to happen. God had already worked in their hearts and minds to make them feel hopeless, and they gave up. But I know where you are and when you come and go and how you rage against me. There's no part of the world that is outside of God's knowledge. No part of the world that he doesn't see. There's no secret closet that he doesn't hear. There's no walls that prevent him. There's no sound barrier that keeps God from seeing everything. I mean, that's a pretty scary thought. I mean, that's true for us. God knows it all. We can't hide from God. Because you rage against me and because your insolence, your pride, those boastful words that reach my ears, I will put a hook in your nose. This is what they sometimes have done to captives. Put a hook in people's nose and pull them along. God says, I'm going to put a hook in your nose and you're going to go where I take you. I'll put a bit in your mouth like a horse or a mule. And you're not going to have control over what you do. You might be powerful, but I'm going to control you. You're going to move just like I want you to move. And I will make you return by the way you came. And then we have another example of this image that comes up repeatedly in Isaiah. In Isaiah 11, a branch from Jesse's root will bear fruit. That's where, we've got this picture that Tanya painted. But it keeps coming up, this image of a plant. And so here, in part of Isaiah's response, he says, once more, a remnant of the house of Judah. It's going to take root below. It's going to be firmly rooted and strong, and it's going to bear fruit above. It's going to be a healthy plant. This is what God is going to do. It's going to be a remnant. Okay, not everyone is going to make it because not everyone has been faithful. But God is going to be faithful to his people, and they will be planted. And life is going to flow into them, and life is going to flow out of them, because this is what God is determined to do with his sinful virgin daughter. It's what he's going to do with his sinful virgin daughter. Plant them and create fruit through them. So this is basically then going to be the end of Assyria and their presence in Jerusalem. Two things are going to happen. God is going to wipe out a lot of their army. I remember as a kid reading the story and not being able to figure out. The angel of the Lord, it says, went into the camp and put to death 185,000 men. And when they got up in the morning, they were all dead. That's how I read it. When they got up in the morning, they were all dead. And as a kid, I thought, who got up? If they were all dead, I couldn't put the words together to figure out. But suddenly a bunch of them are just dead. The army is kind of annihilated. There's no Assyrian record of this happening. Of course not. This was a great defeat for them. But there are other Greek records that talk about this incident. And in that, it's put down to rats. I mean, the idea is rats invaded the camp. They brought some kind of plague. And very possibly that was God's instrument. I mean, God often uses tools, even rats. But anyway, most of the army is gone, and that's the end of the siege, and they can't maintain this campaign, and they go back, and some years later, Sennacherib is worshiping his God, and 2 of his sons murder him. Never again was Assyria a factor in the life of Judah. He defied God, and that was the end of the story for Assyria. And pretty soon Babylon was going to take over that, and that's, Assyria's history. Literally, it's just history. It's gone, and it hasn't come back. It's a great story so far, and there's great faithfulness on the part of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah here is doing pretty much everything right. And in fact, Hezekiah was one of the best kings of Judah. In fact, it said in 2 Kings, Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There is no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. His father and his grandfather, they were pretty much jerks, not very faithful. What happened to Hezekiah, I don't know, but he was faithful and he trusted his God. And he wiped out all the false places of worship. And he built up the kingdom of Judah, and it was fairly strong and fairly wealthy for most of Hezekiah's time. And so this is the assessment of all that long string of kings, at least since the time of David, there was no one else like Hezekiah. That is the assessment of Hezekiah. So he was one of the best. He was one of the best of the Old Testament characters, one of the most faithful. And if only the story had ended there. But there's 2 more chapters in this transition stage in Isaiah. In Isaiah 38, it says, in those days, we'll see in a moment that in those days, the very general phrase, this happened somewhat before the Assyrian siege. Okay, and I'll explain that and the significance of the timing. So this is something that actually happened before those other events. Hezekiah became sick, and he was at the point of death. And the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos, went to him and said, this is what the Lord says. Put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover. So Isaiah the prophet says, this is what God says. God says, you're going to die. God has planned for you to die. You're not going to recover from this sickness. But Hezekiah prays. It says Hezekiah turned his face to the wall. We could read this negatively. It could be that, like Hezekiah was pouting. You know how a kid does. He gets upset and he turns away. And so it could be this is just, Hezekiah acting, like a, 5-year-old boy or something. Or maybe he turns his face away just so he can focus on God and pray. But in any case, he prays and he says, remember, Lord, I walked before you faithfully and wholeheartedly. I've been devoted to you. You've seen what I have done. And the story in 2 Kings says that Isaiah had given this message to Hezekiah and said, you're going to die. And Isaiah walks out, and Hezekiah immediately prays, and it says that before Isaiah had made it out of the house of Hezekiah, he was still kind of crossing the courtyard, God heard his prayer, and God sent Isaiah back. Again, this is just, it's a mystery of how God chooses to relate to us and listen to us and interact with us, because Isaiah says, God says you're going to die. But Hezekiah prays, and God listens. I can't work all that out theologically. But this is the kind of God we can interact with, who listens, and we can have a relationship with him. So Isaiah goes back, and he says, this is what the Lord says, I've heard your prayer, I'm going to add 15 years to your life. Okay? So, good news for Hezekiah, he gets to live 15 more years. That's still a little bit scary because, it's like when you get to the 13th and 14th year, you might begin to think, wow, this is, I think by the 7th or 8th year, I'm thinking, this is halfway over. But in any case, Hezekiah gets 15 more years, which might seem like good news, but, if you saw on Facebook what I'm calling this sermon, it's a disappointing turn. It's a disappointing turn. And this story does not end well. So Hezekiah is grateful, and it has this long, prayer or psalm that Hezekiah gives. He's grateful that, he's not going to the grave, that God has spared him, and so forth. But then, one other incident, Isaiah 39. So Assyria is kind of the great enemy of that part of the world. But there's some other kind of up-and-coming kingdoms, including Babylon. And Babylon is kind of looking for allies, because Babylon is thinking at some point we're going to be in a contest with Assyria, and we want to have good relationship with people. So the king of Babylon has sent some ambassadors to Hezekiah, just to kind of probably feel out the situation, what's going on, what is Hezekiah thinking, is this going to be a good ally, should we invest, and so forth. They're thinking that, and Hezekiah shows those Babylonians everything that he has. All his wealth, where it is, gold and silver, religious instruments in the temple, everything, all his armaments. Everything that he has, Hezekiah shows these guys, thinking, I want them to think how great we are. I want them to be interested in us, I want to be the big guy around here, maybe, that these Babylonians are going to invest in. So Hezekiah shows them everything, and then they leave, and Isaiah comes and says, hey, man, what's been going on? Tell me what happened. And Hezekiah says, and Isaiah asks, well, what did you show them? Well, I showed them everything that we have. And then Isaiah says, one day those guys are coming back. They've got a list now. They know everything that you have. And they're going to want it. And they're coming back. And they're going to take over Jerusalem. And all these things that you've showed them, it's all going to be taken away to Babylon. You were a little bit too concerned about what these people thought about you, that they would be your allies, that they would respect you, that they would want to be in this relationship with you. You're once again trusting in humans and in your own power, and you're not putting trust in God. So Isaiah says it's not going to end well. Some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, who will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. This was Hezekiah's response to that. Well, the word of the Lord you've spoken is good, Hezekiah replied, for he thought, there will be peace and security in my lifetime at least. I'll have my 15 years anyway. And I'll die comfortable and peaceful. At least it'll be okay for me. And that's the end of that story. Isaiah 36 to 39. There's this disappointing turn. I've taken Tanya's picture and tried to mess with it a little bit, and just to
That's like a glory movie. What's happening?
Yes. That's what we should think. But this is how the story is turned suddenly. This hope of life is gone. This guy that was like the best of the kings of Israel, at least since the time of David, even he fails. Even he doesn't manage faithfulness all the way through. Even he disappoints. Why is this story here in Isaiah? And why are the events told in that order? Because like I said, 38 and 39, that bit of the story actually happened before the events in 36 and 37. And the clue to that is that in chapter 38, when Isaiah goes back to Hezekiah, he says, I will deliver you in this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city. Okay. So that was in the future when Hezekiah got sick. Why is the story told this way? So we have first this great example of faithfulness and trust in God and God's deliverance, and then suddenly there's this disappointing turn. Why do we have to read that? Why couldn't we get the bad news first? Get that over with, and then you get this glorious story of the Assyrian army being wiped out. What is happening here? What is this story doing in this story? In Isaiah? What is it creating in our heart? And this isn't the only image of this kind of negative turn. Earlier in Isaiah, in chapter 22, at the end of Isaiah chapter 22, there's a story about some of these characters that we've already heard about, Eliakim and Shebna the scribe. Okay, these leaders, Hezekiah's guys, some of the main leaders in the kingdom of Judah. Shebna has gotten a little bit proud. He was put in charge of the palace. We talked about pride. We had that sermon a few weeks ago, and he was proud of himself in his power and influence, and so God cut him down. And then God raises up Eliakim, who's going to be kind of the main leader. And there's these, wonderful things that are said about Eliakim, and the people are going to be able to trust in him. In that day I will summon my servant, Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah. I will clothe him with your robe, Shebna's robe. Shebna is removed from his post, and his robe of power is put on Eliakim. And I will hand your authority to him, and he will be a father to those who live in Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. I will place on his shoulder the key to the house of David. What he opens, no one can shut. What he shuts, no one can open. Of course, that's said in the book of Revelation about Jesus. I will drive him like a peg into a firm place. So we have this image of a piece of wood, and it's like it's maybe a tent peg to hold the tent up, but you can picture a peg put in a wall, and you can hang your coats on it, all your coats are out there on that wall. That's, thanks to Bill who put those out there, but they're all hanging on that peg, and they're probably secure there. We believe in the quality of Bill's work. But sometimes there's a disappointing turn. But this is what God says about Eliakim. I'm going to drive him like a peg, and people are going to be able to rest in him and trust in him. All the glory of his family will hang on him, its offspring and offshoots, all its lesser vessels, from bowls to the jars. That's all good. This piece of wood that comes from a branch, from a root, let's drive it in. It's going to be firm. In that day, declares the Lord Almighty, the peg driven into the firm place will give way. It will be sheared off and will fall, and the load hanging on it will be cut down. The Lord has spoken. It's that same image of a disappointing turn. And God does something, and it is God who is doing it. And there's some reliable people, some reliable humans, but they are just humans. And ultimately, humans cannot be trusted in. In the flow of Isaiah, what this story does is it creates longing. It should create in our minds, why is it this way, and is anything going to change? Is anyone going to come along who can actually fix what's wrong? Is there actually any hope? And it's meant to create in our hearts a longing for God to do something, for it to be God. And so the point of it is simply this. We need Jesus. We need Jesus. We need the second half of the book of Isaiah. We need that servant to come, who's not just a human, because humans always disappoint. Humans always disappoint. Every human disappoints. Every church disappoints. Every church disappoints. And if we look even for a church as our primary source of hope, we're going to be disappointed. Look, I believe in the church. I believe in this church. And I believe the importance of God's people. And what God's people do is vitally important. And we need to live up to the name and honor of Jesus Christ. And people ought to be able to. They ought to be able to look at us and see Jesus. But ultimately, they need Jesus more than us. And we need to just not mainly draw disciples to ourselves, but constantly take people to Jesus. Jesus Christ alone. Jesus Christ alone is the answer. Jesus Christ alone is the hope. We can only trust in Jesus. We must come to Jesus. We must hold on to Jesus. We must keep Jesus before our mind and not put our hope and trust in anyone else, ultimately. People can help us on the way, and I hope this church helps you on the way. But at some point, this body will probably disappoint you. At some point, I'm certain to disappoint you. Okay? I'm half the man Hezekiah was. Okay? And he had a disappointing turn. And I will no doubt have a disappointing turn at some point. You know, I hope it'll be, well, I hope no one will know it happens, okay? Probably only my wife will know that. But this is the truth. This is just the truth. There's only hope in Jesus. Only hope in Jesus. And a lot of these Old Testament stories just are there to tell us we need something more. We need something more. We need God to intervene. We need Jesus. That's what this story is doing in Isaiah. And hopefully the last half of Isaiah will begin to see how Isaiah answers the longing of our heart. What we need in a disappointing world, God has in mind to send. We're going to sing one last song in response